Hello everyone and welcome back to my channel. Today I'm going to be revisiting Volume 1 of the Wing Leader series, and that is Wing Leader Victories 1940 to 1942. I'm still waiting and saving to get my hands on some of the later volumes, but this volume is still providing an immense amount of entertainment and replayability for me. Now I'm going to do something rather different today. This is going to be an after action report. I had very good correspondence with one of you on this channel, and I've had a fair number of requests offline, as it were, from people who are interested in this game. Quite a few of you who've spoken to me are a bit on the fence about whether to invest in it or not. And they'd like to get an idea of the sort of narratives that this game generates. So in this action report, I'm going to take you through a mission that I've played recently. Now, this game does involve rather a lot of dice rolling and cross-referencing of tables, which can slow down a video after action report. So what I've done is I took detailed notes during the game I've just completed, and I'm really just going to walk you guys through it as an after action report, really. So as far as I'm concerned, I'm merely retelling what's happened. Hopefully you'll find this interesting. So today's mission, or should I say yesterday's mission, was the Like Arrows Against Gladiators Scenario 9, which featured a British bombing raid on an Italian supply depot in Greece in February 1941. Historically, this was a very small action. It consisted of 2 squadrons of Blenheim bombers, 2 flights of Gladiators. I think there were only about 8 British fighters present. And 2 squadrons of Italian fighters. Very small action, as I say. There was only 1 loss historically, that being one of the Italian fighters. And although the Italians claimed one of the bombers, it managed to limp home. So not much to this, but it makes for a very interesting scenario. And if, like me, you're rather a fan of the poor old Gladiator, then it's a fun scenario to play. So again, the aircraft involved are on the British side, our old friends, the Gladiator Mark II and the Blenheim. We're not using the Blenheim Mark IV in this scenario. We're using the earlier Blenheim Mark I, which had a slightly lower protection rating. Not so good. The Italians come with their Freccia fighters. Again, because it's an early war scenario, this is the slightly later model. So if you flip the card over, their early model has a slightly reduced protection rating as well. So everyone's a bit more vulnerable in combat. I'm going to zoom in as I get into what's going on, but just to give you a broad overview of what's happening. The British bombers are here, and they are just going to travel on a straight course to attempt to bomb the supply dump and its AA defences here. What we have in the middle here are some broken clouds. Now the counters are overlaid so that they indicate that both boxes are affected by broken cloud. Above the British bombers is 1 flight of the Gladiators on an escort mission, and ahead of them, the remaining Gladiators on a sweep mission. Historically, both Italian interceptor squadrons were at moderately low levels. They decided to assemble their entire force before moving to intercept. The scenario book offers a variant where they are sent up separately, and I've decided to go for that just to have a bit of a difference. So with the separate takeoff and the lack of an assembly, 1 squadron of Italian fighters has gained a favourable intercept altitude. The other one down here has only just taken off and is going to have to labour a bit to gain some altitude. So that's the starting situation. So without any further ado, let's move to turn 1. Now, following the initiative order, planes which are less advantaged, i.e. bombers, tend to have to go first. Planes which are alerted go unalerted. So they're keyed up, but they don't have the same situational awareness, go next. And finally, alerted fighters, those who are expecting trouble, go last. So this may seem a bit strange, but in fact it makes perfect sense because the person who goes last has the tactical advantage. The Italians have only a general idea of where the British are. They haven't made visual contact yet. And so they have been vectored somewhere over there. And they will keep flying that course in that general direction, slowly gaining altitude until they actually sight their British opposite numbers. Sighting range in this game is 9 boxes. So on turn 1, the British bombers move first. They're the easiest in that they just have these pre-programmed courses that they follow. And they are actually going to dive for part of their movement. And now I say dive, it sounds rather dramatic for a bomber, but really they're just slowly descending, because the optimum bombing altitude for this mission was roughly at cloud level, so they get a bit of cover. They knew where the target was. They were going to level bomb it anyway. And it was comfortably above the level of the Italian flak, which could only reach about that high in game terms. So the British bombers move first, descend a bit just to get into a comfortable bombing altitude, and also once they level off, it means they'll be able to enter that lovely patch of broken cloud, which is great for a bomber. You're attacking a static target, so you know where it is. That cloud gives you cover, and that's what they're going for. The next aircraft to move are the escorts. So they are here. Now they have to keep formation on the bombers, so that is what they are going to do. And oh wait, sorry, my apologies, I'd ordered a dive. The fighters can dive more capably than bombers, so they're going to descend and keep next to their charges. They're actually going to close up a bit, because reason for doing that is when you've got clear sky, it's all right to remain a bit distant from the aircraft you're protecting. But when they start to enter cloud, you want to keep closer to them to keep an eye on them. And in the meantime, the sweeping squadron will carry on ahead. Now their job is really to look for trouble. They want to pin the Italian escort fighters. So moving over to the Italians, their Squadron A, because they're an alerted fighter, they can move faster. They've got a slightly better situational awareness, and they know there's an enemy in the region that they have to hunt for, so they get a slight speed advantage. Squadron B elects to climb, but they're not in a rush. They're gaining altitude slowly because they're quite far away from the place they've been vectored to. They imagine that they've got a bit of time to gain a favourable altitude, find the Brits, wherever they might happen to be. Nobody sighted each other on this turn. So we carry on to turn 2. The bombers, rather predictably, level off. The first squadron enters the clouds. Second squadron fairly hot on their heels. And the Gladiators, who are escorting them, catch up, maintaining their position just above. The sweeping squadron, in the meantime, because they still have not sighted any of the Italians, are just going to advance a bit more cautiously, continuing on their original course in the vague direction of the target, still keeping a lookout for enemy planes. Italian Squadron A is determinedly moving forwards. Now there could be a sighting any minute. Both sides are now very close, and in a second I will bring the camera down so you have a better idea of what's going on. In the meantime, in contrast to Fighter Squadron A, Italian Squadron B is continuing to climb at a rather leisurely rate. But still, they're making progress. They're almost at the level of the clouds. Now, things begin to happen. At the beginning of turn 3, both sides can roll for tallying. And I'm going to bring us down just a little bit so we can see all the aircraft involved. So both sides make their tallying or sighting rolls. And the first thing that happens is that Italian Squadron A tallies Gladiator Flight R. Unfortunately, the British do not sight them in return, despite the very close distance. However, curiously, the escort flight Q manages to sight Italian Squadron A. So we have a curious daisy chain almost of sightings. Now, squadrons generally can only sight one enemy, so the Italians are fixating on the Gladiators ahead and slightly above of them. The Gladiators over here are fixating on the Italian fighter squadron, and that lot are just cruising along blissfully unaware, somehow. So the bombers continue droning on happily towards the target. So far there's been no enemy interference. Unlike fighters, bombers do not tally. They will defend themselves in attack if attacked, but they don't actively go looking for trouble. And now it gets slightly more complicated because several fighters have been alerted. We start with unalerted fighters. So this group, unaware that they've been spotted, carry on their sweep, placing themselves rather vulnerably above their impending assailants. Now, we have 3 more squadrons, well, 2 squadrons and a flight, that are now alerted to the presence of oh no, sorry, apologies, they're not, so they're going to carry on climbing. They are beginning to level off because after all this climbing, their aircraft are beginning to run out of puff a bit, so they're going to have to level off for a while before they continue their climb. Now it comes to these two. They're both alerted, they're both at the same altitude. The tiebreaker is their airspeed. The Italians have the advantage there, so they can force the Gladiator squadron to go first. And for want of anything better to do, the British, possibly perceiving that their colleagues are soon going to be in trouble, change their mission from escort to sweep and move to intercept them. Unfortunately, they are too late. The Italians climb and engage that Gladiator squadron. They opt for a speed fight, which is a boom and zoom rather than a turning fight. So they're going to hit and run this British formation. In the exchange of fire, no aircraft are lost, and the Italian squadron is disrupted and expends some of its ammunition. But rather crucially for the British, their flight is broken. It's lost its cohesion and they've expended some of their ammunition. The British, in a broken state, have no choice but to try and collect themselves and run for home. The Italians, who have bigger fish to fry, opt to let them go. So the quick combat in that sector ended bloodlessly, and with these Gladiators making a run for it off map. So the only good news for the British is the Italians lose their situational awareness marker because they have deliberately decided to let the British go. This could mean the bomber squadrons will be in trouble fairly shortly. At the beginning of the next turn, the Italian squadron, the very recently triumphant one, tallies the next bunch of incoming Gladiators. Not so good for the British because there's no chance of a surprise attack now and a reversal of this decision. The bombers continue to hold their course, getting ever closer to the target. The unalerted Italian squadron continues a slow climb to try and intercept the bombers. And now we get the alerted squadrons. The British have to go first because they're at a lower altitude, so they're at a bit of a disadvantage there. So they decide to bite the bullet and go straight for it, climbing to attack. The Italians, of course, can see them and accept the attack. Let's get in even closer. So we have yet another quick exchange of gunfire up there. Now the Italian squadron has slightly lost some of its cohesion already and is already low on ammo. This flight of Gladiators, this four-ship formation approaching them, is fresh, but they're at a disadvantage. They have slower aircraft, they're climbing, and the Italians have the initiative and have turned to dive on them. So the Italians once again are able to call the shots. In the scuffle that follows, the British lose one aircraft, unfortunately their flight leader. The Italians suffer no losses, but their squadron is now virtually out of ammunition and their cohesion has further broken. So in a sense it's a mutual annihilation in that the British have lost their command and control for this flight. So the remaining 3 aircraft break off in a broken state and return to base. The Italians similarly break off because they're in a position where there's not very much they can achieve anymore. So that just leaves one Italian fighter squadron against the 2 groups of Blenheims. Now, so far, things are actually going very well for the Italians. Half of their strength has been taken out of the equation, but they have swept the skies of the escorting British fighters, and unescorted bombers are never happy when they're facing both fighters and flak. So we'll have to see how the rest of this plays out. Just to make the British enjoy life even less, at the start of the next turn, despite the cloud cover, Italian Squadron B sights the first wave of Blenheims. This is really not going all that well. The Blenheims, of course, move on their pre-programmed course, which takes them right into the approaching Italians. And it gives Italian Squadron B the opportunity to set up for a head-on attack, which they do. Incredibly, and possibly because unlike its other half, Italian Squadron B consists primarily of green pilots, there are no casualties. Either side, it's really quite amazing. So the British breathe a huge sigh of relief. They haven't knocked down any Italian fighters, but their squadron has held together. It's really quite amazing. And they continue on towards their target. Milling around in this area, the Italians find there's even more British bombers heading towards them, but they want to stop that group. So once the British bombers have moved, Squadron B does 180 and moves to chase the group that it was originally pursuing. It engages them with no problems whatsoever, and this time opts to approach from the rear where they'll get better firing angles. Of course, some bombers are vulnerable in this game to head-on attacks, but of course you have more opportunities for sustained fire if you approach them from the rear. So the British are not out of the woods yet. The Italian fighters are still there and still on them. The Italians opt for another hack and slash rather than a turning fight, so they're playing to their strengths as fighters and minimising the defensive qualities of the British formation. Again, however, miraculously, despite a further expenditure of ammunition on both sides, it is the Italians that end up breaking. The problem with green pilots, and is very well modelled in this game, they get overexcited, they hold their triggers down, they don't set up properly. It can be quite frustrating to watch if you're the controlling player. So the Italians very rapidly squander their ammunition, lose their cohesion, and have no choice to break off. The British have no choice but to let them go because, of course, there's no way a bomber can pursue a disengaging fighter. But to their immense relief, the British suddenly find that their ordeal, at least from the sky, is over. Of course, that tally marker goes away as well, so the British now have the skies to themselves. The rest of the mission comprises the bombing run. Now, bear in mind, the Italians are leading 1 victory point to 0 at the moment for having downed that Gladiator. The first British squadron drones over the target. There's no flak because the Italian flak is light. Around the supply dump, it's basically soldiers with rifles, small arms, nothing that can reach the Blenheims at that altitude. The British release their bombs and they score really, really well. 50% accuracy for Squadron 1, and that equates to 4 bomb hits on the target, which is pretty impressive. The target's defensive strength, because they are of course aiming for the supply dump, is only 3, which means that the British have inflicted heavy damage. Having dropped its bombs, and with an even greater sigh of relief, the first British squadron heads for home. The second one arrives over the target, but they don't perform so well, probably because smoke from the first squadron's successes are obscuring it, but for whatever reason their bombs are way, way, way off. They don't score a single convincing hit on the target, but in a sense it doesn't matter because the objective has been heavily damaged. It's going to cause the Italians a headache, and most importantly, every single one of their bombers is intact. Having dropped their bombs, they turn for home. And that is the end of the mission. The British won a very convincing victory with 11 victory points. Now, the last time I played this game, they lost by 2 because the bombing accuracy was not so good, and the Italians managed to shoot down one of the fighters and one of the bombers for no losses of their own. So this game is not overly swingy, I would say, but depending on your tactics and also a fair degree of luck, as was the case in World War II, you can find a fairly variable experience every time you play, but they're believable variations. You don't get any Hollywood wackiness happening here. There's not that much that might surprise you except for the odd moment of, what, you guys didn't hit a thing? Or, oh my gosh, you did quite well there. Again, those sorts of things did happen. So I hope that's given you an idea from an after-action report perspective of how a mission will play out in Wing Leader. Obviously, this is a very accelerated experience because I excluded the dice rolling and information counter placing and all the rest of it. If you would like to see a full-length playthrough in the future, please do let me know. But in the meantime, I hope you found this interesting. If you'd like more after-action reports in the same vein, again, please comment and let me know. And above all, thank you for your company and thank you very much for tuning in. Bye.